talk to you a little bit about how I take this whole story all together. Get my notes out here. And the short of it is that you've got to begin at the beginning. And what happened here is that we had this colonial period. We have this this crop. It's basically a grass that grew in Southeast Asia. When the colonists came, they had this sort of imperial colonial empire things, and they would have these gigantic plantations with plantation bosses and what looked an awful lot like slave labor. They had imports to the home country, and they had the government running this system that made it work. The East India Company was really, you know, a sort of a pillaging operation that was licensed by the crown. And we still have that. That's really what's going on in the sugar industry here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to compare the development of two sugar industries, one in Australia and one here, and to see how that government control, how they evolved, and how similar they are, and what happened that's different in Australia than here that relates to what we're doing today. So, first of all, here's our sugar cane right here. It's basically a subtropical plant, so it has to grow there. That's what it looks like in Australia. And so, what would happen is that in the colonial empires, Colonial Sugar Company in Australia has this massive numbers of what amount to slaves. They would burn what they called the trash, the other leaves that didn't have any sugar on them, on the outside of the sugar cane. When they got done with that, they were doing it to reduce the weight. Then what they would do is they would harvest it with these razor sharp cane blades, called machetes, but they're really knives that are sharp as razors. If any of y'all ever worked in stuff like this, you sharpen your knives about every 20 or 30 minutes. Because if you keep them razor sharp, you can really cut efficiently. And how I know this is personal experience. Because I was working on a surveying crew when I was about 17 years old, and I had this knife that was just razor sharp. I kept it totally sharp going through the bushes. I could cut a tree down that was as thick as your lower leg in one shot. And I wasn't paying much attention when I was going forward towards the crew chief. And I accidentally cut so close to him, I cut through the back of his pant leg. And he was disappointed. That was how I left the job. I'm sorry, I missed this thing up here. So I can hold my thing up here. So what happens then is that these guys have cut this huge amount of cane, they carry it on their shoulders, carry it in their arms. It's incredibly heavy. And so what you have to do is you have to have some way of transporting it. And in Australia, they started building these little steam rail lines. You look in photos from the 1880s or so, you see these cute little rail lines. They had a rail line that went all the way to the plant. If you've been to the EA, they do exactly the same thing. They got all this from Australia. So they do their pre-harvest burning, and then here's the rail line. This is sort of a replica of the rail line from Australia. It's got, you've been out there, there's this huge rail network that leads to the Clewiston Mill. And that's because the cost is so high to transport it. There's the Clewiston Mill right there, and you can see if you look at the bottom, all those train cars down there. Those are hopper cars, and like in Australia, they open they put it back in the top there, and those are hopper cars, and they drop it down into the chute affair down here, goes right into the plant. What happens then is that as Julie was saying, is that what they do then is cut it into little billets, and they squeeze it, these gigantic rollers. They squeeze it so completely that when they're done squeezing it, you can light it on fire. It's amazing how well it's done. And so, and then what they use is they use the bagasse, that waste product that they squeezed out to heat the boilers that boil the sugar juice down. And this is the Australian version of that. It's really exactly the same. Same scheme, same hopper cars. And so that seems to be where we got it here. So what happened was then the Australian experience started to diverge. When they got to the 1980s, they realized their productivity of their farms was declining, or actually was leveling out, and they hired some agronomists, one of which we know, to try to figure out why it was declining so much. And they concluded that what they needed to do was to get some harvesting machines and have a way of separating that trash and leaving it out in the field. And so it was that this is the Australian harvester. You can see what it's doing. It's going through the field like that, and it's dropping it in the hopper car, which is going to go out to the rail line. So what happened in Florida, that's when we started to diverge, is that in Florida, we still felt that burning enslaved labor was really the right way to do it. And they fought and fought and fought. The industry fought mechanizing. I remember in the early 1990s talking to a U.S. sugar lobbyist who was explaining to me in detail how it was utterly and absolutely impossible to run machines like that in our sugarcane fields for the reason that it would compact the soil and make it unusable. And it was a very convincing story, but when it got out that what was happening was so many laborers were getting cut so badly that they actually will occasionally have a school bus that was parked at the end of the field, and when people got injured enough that they were bleeding enough that they needed first aid, they would go to the school bus, and when it was filled, they would go to the first aid station. So that got out, and similar sort of slave conditions got out. And so there was a decision by the Van Hoels that the optics were just too terrible and they had to change. So what they did was, after these long explanations about how it was absolutely impossible to do anything at all to change everything, they went to these harvesters. Here, I've got them in the wrong order here. So what they did was they run the harvesters through the fields, but they still burn. And they burn supposedly get rid of the trash, which was done in Australia. So here's the Australian harvester. What actually happened literally was the plans for the Australian harvesters were stolen. Actually, an Australian harvester was secreted to Louisiana, and they took it apart and figured out how to make another one, and John Deere started making them. So this is actually, these are replicas of the Australian harvesters. And so how the harvesters work is it's got this giant extractor fan, and you can see there on the top, there's the extractor fan, and it blows the trash off of billets of sugarcane, and that's that Julie was talking about. That's the trash that's basically mulch. It's aids in water control. It means you have to put a lot less fertilizer on it. You have to cultivate it with the plow less because the weeds don't burn as much. And so those are these things that really improve productivity, but it takes a while. It takes 5 to 7 years. So there's the extractor. That's what sugarcane looks like when it's burned. See, it's a little bit different than it was when it's green. But there's a big disadvantage to it, which is that when you leave burnt sugarcane in the field for more than a couple of days, you can't harvest it because it's no good. So it really does change the difficulty of a successful harvest if there's a whole lot of rain. So here we have our Florida experience. Isn't it lovely? We're still going at it. There's there's an ad for the harvester right there. You can kind of see the wheels how they do that. That's the Australian version. That's what it looks like. Here's Florida, and more to the same. So here's what our experience in it is that our first case, I think, in 1990 when we opened the office was against sugarcane burning. And back then, the sugar companies had a little bit of influence on the Department of Agriculture, which and their permitting system. We challenged the permitting system. And what we said is that it isn't really a permitting system because the farmers have the permit forms themselves, and they fill them out themselves and turn them in at the end of the month, which I can conceive of a more rigorous system. And there was only one criteria, and the criteria was whether they were burning at night. You couldn't burn at night, and that's all you had to do. And the reason why they had that, it wasn't their idea to that, it was because there had been so many fatal car accidents with smoke in the highways that people were getting killed. And again, it was the optics just looked too terrible, so they said only burn in the daytime. That was the regulatory system they had. We couldn't persuade a judge that that wasn't a regulatory system in Division of Administrative Hearings, but we made such a ruckus about it that they now have a new advanced system. And what happens is that what you have to do is you have to get a permit. It has to be before you burn it. It's got strict conditions on it. And the conditions are that try not to burn if it's blowing to middle-class neighborhoods, but it's okay to blow into black neighborhoods. That's really is what the rules say, but they don't write it that way. That's just the wind directions. And so that's the reason we're not getting PM too much over here, because they're burning in ways so it doesn't blow to where it's being monitored. And so it's a massive problem, apart from the waste that it causes. There's 3,000 pounds, 6,000 pounds of hazardous air pollutants that come out of this stuff. It's, they occupy about well under 1,000th of the land area in the entire state, and they account for 16% of the formaldehyde, the essential ingredient in embalming fluid. And so it is that what we say is that, as I was showing you earlier, this is an integrated agricultural production facility that goes from machine to machine to machine, just like any other production facility, like making nylon or anything else. And that it should, for the purposes of the Clean Air Act, be treated as what it is, one integrated industrial facility where every source of air pollution gets treated the same. And why I showed you this big long story about the history of it is that the argument is that we shouldn't have to because we can't do it. The fact is they can't do it. They've got the machines. They're using exactly the same machines as they use in Australia, but the difference is they don't turn on the extractor fans. That's literally what the difference is. So they can fix this problem, and they ought to. And I think reform is needed, and I think that we have some causative action under federal law that we can and will pursue. We've already started down the track, and we're petitioning EPA on a Title V permit now. So there you have it.